Well, everybody, good evening. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining the MetroWest Climate Solutions this evening. We're a group of residents, and you could show the first slide, Stephanie, interested in practical solutions to the difficult problem of how we can get to a healthier carbon neutral world. And this, our second talk, we're a new organization. Our second talk was almost exactly a year ago on carbon taxes. And then right after the talk, we went online. This is our sixth presentation in this series. If you would like to receive our monthly e-news, where we advertise future events as well as other events in the area, you'll see the email down there at the bottom, MetroWestClimate@gmail. So this evening, we'll be talking about trash, waste, garbage, a very tough problem. Massachusetts residents are generating more of it every year, and yet at the same time, landfills and incinerators are reaching their end of life and some are closing. It sounds like we're between a rock and a hard place, or maybe between a full garbage can and a closed landfill. Next slide. So let me get right to it and introduce Kirstie Pecci. She'll be our guide to garbage this evening. Kirstie knows as much about trash as anyone in the Commonwealth. She launched the Conservation Law Foundation's Zero Waste Project with the goal of making Massachusetts a zero waste state. Not only is she an expert, but she's also passionate and a collaborator. She wants to help the rest of us understand how we can get to a zero waste world and why we need to. So Kirstie is busy giving talks around the state. We're very fortunate to have her with us tonight. Kirstie.
Well, thank you very much, Joel. That's a very kind introduction. I am very passionate about this. And one of the reasons I like working in this area is because we really can make a difference in this area. Not only can we reduce how much waste we produce and really move towards a zero waste future, but in doing so, we'll not only protect the environment, protect human health, but we'll also save a lot of money and create a lot of local green jobs. So this is a win-win-win across the board, you'll find. Why don't we start with the first slide, please? I believe that, there we go, great. I think you want to change the view so that some folks just see the one big slide. So while she does that, let me just introduce myself again. Kirstie Pecci, the director of the Zero Waste Project at Conservation Law Foundation. Conservation Law Foundation has been around since the mid-60s. We're a nonprofit organization, and what we do is we use the law, science, and the market to protect human health and protect our homes. We work all through New England and all 6 New England states, and we work on a variety of issues, not just waste, also ocean protection, clean energy issues, transportation. We run the full gamut of different types of programs at Conservation Law Foundation. And you can find us at conservationlawfoundation.org, clf.org, and also, of course, we're on the internet as far as not only a website, but also Twitter, Facebook, all that jazz, if you're into that stuff. Next slide, please. So, you know, zero waste sounds pie in the sky. We did a series of cartoons and other pictures on our website to try and talk to people about how to really intersect with this problem. We produce 5.5 million tons of waste in Massachusetts each year for disposal. So that's not including what goes into your recycling bin. Those are the materials that are going straight to the landfill or to the incinerator. That's way too much, and it causes a huge problem in a bunch of different ways. Next slide, please. So the thing is, we really need to produce less trash. That seems like an obvious solution, but traditionally we've perceived this problem and been told that this problem is a problem of how we handle our personal habits and how we handle our recycling system. What we really need to do is take this in hand and create programs that actually force us and help us to produce less trash, and also make the producers of packaging and other materials responsible for the end of life of materials. Next, please. So tonight, what I'd like to cover is how we dispose of waste, what our recycling system looks like now, what is zero waste, and zero waste programs that work, and also where we can go from here. Next, please. So disposing of our waste in Massachusetts, what does that look like? So in Massachusetts, we have a series of different landfills and next slide, please, and a series of different incinerators. We have 7 incinerators and about, it depends on how you count them, about 8 or 9 landfills. We have a few different systems throughout the Commonwealth that people may not be aware of. If you live in the eastern part of the state, in eastern Massachusetts, then probably your city or town provides curbside trash pickup and curbside recycling to your home, if you're in a single family home or in a 2 or 3 or 4 unit home. If you live in central Massachusetts or western Massachusetts, it's more likely that if your town provides any kind of a service at all, it's a drop-off service, meaning that you're going to a transfer station or a recycling center and dropping off your trash and your recyclables there. If you can't get to that station, if you're not able to bring your trash yourself, then what happens is you contract directly with a waste hauler who comes and picks up your trash and recyclables at your home. So you pay them, year to year to do that. The other thing that you want to understand, there are city and town run systems, and then there are systems that are not city and town run. You have to contact that hauler yourself as a resident. Also, there's commercial versus residential systems. Most cities and towns, if they provide the service to you, only provide it to single family or a few units homes, maybe the school, maybe some of the town buildings. They don't provide services usually to commercial enterprises or large institutions. So those institutions and that commercial trash is also picked up on a private hauler basis. They contact a hauler and then their dumpster is picked up there. That's the case for multifamilies and apartment buildings too. And then you also have to understand that because of those different systems, there are different systems for recycling. So there are single stream systems, dual stream systems, and what we call deep sort systems. If you're going to a transfer station that has a deep sort system, for instance, in Wellesley, they have one, in Sturbridge, where I live, they have one, you bring your recyclables and your trash there and you sort your recyclables by category. So brown glass, green glass, number 1 plastic, number 2 plastic, paper, cardboard, metal, aluminum, like that. That's pretty much the categories that are usually there. If you're getting curbside pickup, then you're either got dual stream, which some towns on the Cape and some places in Western Mass still have, which means that your paper and cardboard are in one container or in a bag, and then your containers, your plastic, number 1, number 2, and number 5 plastics, your aluminum, and your glass are in another bin. That's dual stream, and that works pretty well to keep the glass out of the paper and the paper out of the glass, for instance, and makes a more clean material stream. If you have single stream, all that's going in together. And so you have to understand that there are different systems. The best systems to make sure that we actually recycle these materials are deep sort systems. Those materials retain their value. Single stream and many times dual stream do not as much, if at all, retain that value. And so it's really important to understand when you're looking at our waste system across Massachusetts, we're part of a New England-wide system. So waste companies have done what's called vertical integration. They've purchased and taken over recycling companies and transfer stations as well. So there are haulers who pick up materials, recyclables and or waste. And then there are waste companies where the incinerators and landfills are run by. And then there are transfer stations where these materials are brought by haulers. Sometimes the haulers are owned by the waste companies, it depends, but sometimes they're independent haulers, and they bring the materials and pick materials up from transfer stations and then bring them to landfills and incinerators. So there's a web of interconnectedness as far as where your waste is going and how it's being transported not only in Massachusetts, but across the whole region. And we're importing and exporting waste as we go. Okay, next slide, please. This is a slide that'll tell you what, this shows you where our landfills and our incinerators are in Massachusetts. So you can see on the northern section of Massachusetts there are 3 incinerators there in one county. It's the only county in the United States that I know of that has 3 incinerators in it. The little blue lumps are MSW landfills, the pink lumps are ash landfills, and then there's one sludge landfill up in North Adams too. If you go to the next slide, please, you'll see that this green that you see in the map there, that's our environmental justice communities in Massachusetts. Environmental justice communities are communities that either don't have access to English, in other words, English isn't their first language, or they're impoverished, or they're people of color. So you'll see as you look through this map, the incinerators especially are in or adjacent to communities that have a portion of the community is an environmental justice community. Moving from the west to the east, out west, that's Pittsfield up there. Then if you go southeast there, that's Springfield. It's in Agawam, Springfield, right on the edge there. If you move further west, that's Millbury. Going to the northern tip there, there's Haverhill and North Andover incinerators. Then there's the Saugus incinerator moving down. And those are 6 of the 7 incinerators in Massachusetts. Those are all environmental justice communities. And the large landfills, similarly, if you look at the center of that blue lump in the center of the state there, but towards the north, that's the Fitchburg landfill. That's the biggest one in the state. If you move south, there was at the Connecticut line there, that was the Southbridge landfill that's now closed. So each of these communities that you're seeing big landfills in, they're usually environmental justice communities as well, but the incinerators are almost all environmental justice communities. Somebody said, what does Lincoln have? And I'm not exactly sure what they mean by that, because I'm not sure if you mean where does Lincoln's waste go, or where, if Lincoln has a facility. There used to be that almost every town had a little landfill that was just for their community, but now landfills have become regional. They're run by big corporations and they're regional, like the incinerators are. So I would guess that Lincoln's waste probably goes to the 3 incinerators towards the north here, the northern part of the state. Next slide, please. So when we look at what we're dealing with, part of the problem is a 5.5 million tons, right? Like just that the sheer volume that we're dealing with means that we have an engineering problem just because there's so many tons involved. But the other problem is what we're actually throwing away. This is a pie chart that shows the what's being disposed of in Massachusetts, and we'll see 2 things. One, much of what is going into our incinerators and landfills is either not supposed to go into our incinerators and landfills because we have waste bans that prohibit it from happening, or it's recyclable or compostable. And then the other thing you'll see is there's some very toxic materials that are in our waste disposal. And as a result of that, they're interspersed in that 5.5 million tons. So in that landfill, they're causing a toxicity problem. And in that incinerator, they're causing a toxicity problem. So we end up with leaching from the landfill of water, rain that ends up being contaminated leachate, as well as methane and other gases coming off of the pile in the landfill because of that toxicity and because of the food and other materials that are being buried. And then on the incineration side, if you burn certain materials, it creates even worse chemicals that come out the stack. So in other words, if you burn plastic, for instance, that's the recipe for dioxin. And then meanwhile, the other part of it that's really important to understand about incineration is for every 4 tons that you burn, you end up with a ton of ash, which, because there are toxics in the system, there are toxics in the ash. So when we look at this pie chart, I look at this pie chart as an opportunity, a frustrating opportunity, but an opportunity. For instance, the largest slice here of the pie, the light blue slice, are organic materials. So that's food and yard waste. That is compostable. It's cheaper to compost it than it is to dispose of it. Composting is usually 35, 45 bucks a ton, creates local jobs. There's lots of good reasons for us to be composting these materials. Then if you look at the other blue pie chart piece, that's paper and cardboard. Again, recyclable cardboard is actually a cash crop. So that's something that we should be getting out of the system. And we're not allowed to be throwing paper and cardboard into our waste as per DEP regs. Then if you look at the glass, that little orange slice, that's entirely recyclable. The metals, again, entirely recyclable. And then if you look at what's called other material, that gray, That is textiles for the most part. So about 6 or 7% of those 9 points are, so 6 or 7 of those 9 points are textiles. So I've already given you more than 60, almost 70% of these materials are recyclable, compostable, and shouldn't be out in the system at all. Then about half of the construction and demolition materials are recyclable, in that green slice. And then plastics, maybe about half of those plastics are recyclable, but plastics are a more complicated problem. And so then when I'm talking about the toxicity, there's some really toxic materials in construction and demolition materials, which again are just mixed in with everything else. Really toxic materials in household hazardous waste. And really, the electronics are also very toxic. So we've got smaller amounts of materials that are very toxic interspersed with this large tonnage. And that's why this becomes such a horrible engineering problem to deal with. Yet there are a lot of opportunities if we started separating things out. Next slide, please. And so looking at plastics, just so you know, and I could do a whole half hour on plastics really easily. I actually cut 10 slides from this because I said there's no way we're talking about plastics, but I could talk about plastics. Plastics are absolutely a huge climate problem. The oil and gas companies' plan B is plastics. And in fact, Bill McKibben, who founded 350.org, is calling plastic frack plastic. And he's right. It's made of frack gas. It's how these companies want to stay relevant and keep selling us their crap. And their idea for recyclability means to create it, have it pollute at every stage: extraction, refinement, consumption, waste, and environment, and then burn it at the end. Chemical recycling is breaking it down and burning it. Like, that's their best case scenario, because then they can frack some more gas and do it all over again tomorrow. And there's a huge influx of financing going into plastic development right now. We need to do everything we can to avoid using plastic because it's bad for your health. We're finding plastic in women's placentas. Plastic is a problem. It's probably destroying how the ocean actually creates oxygen. We need to really make sure that or the plankton in the ocean creates oxygen. We need to move away from plastics wherever we can. And we need to move away from single-use goods. So that's a whole nother presentation, but just know that plastic is a climate problem. There's a tremendous amount of good information about it. Feel free to email me at the end if you want to, and I'm happy to send you whatever you want, but it's a real problem. Next slide, please. So looking at our recycling system today in Massachusetts, so that's how our disposal system is working. And as I said, I explained the single use and dual stream and the deep sort systems of recycling. But looking at the recycling system today, next slide, please, and trying to figure out, why is this working and why is this not working? What you need, where some things work, some things don't. What you need to understand, first of all, is what is recycling. And so recycling is not taking a material and then grinding it up and using it for roadbed. Like, it's not taking a glass bottle and grinding it up and using it for roadbed. It's not taking a glass bottle and grinding it up and using it as landfill cover. That's not recycling. Recycling is supposed to be the highest and best use of that material. So what we really are aiming for in our recycling is not downcycling. Like, we don't want to make bottles into clothes per se. Not that that's the worst thing you could do, but that's not our goal. Our goal is to make bottles into bottles. Our goal is circularity, so that we no longer have to use virgin materials to make glass. We're running out of sand. So we don't want to make new glass. We want to make our glass bottles into glass bottles again if we're recycling them. We want our aluminum cans to be made into new aluminum cans. We want our plastic bottles to be made into plastic bottles. What's really important to understand about this is that plastic is not recyclable forever. Plastic can only be recycled a few times. And there are so many different kinds of plastic. All those little numbers are different polymers, different types of plastic made of different, combinations of these chemicals. And as a result, you can't take a load of number 1 plastic, mix it in with a load of number 2 plastic, and then merrily just recycle it into number 1 and number 2 bottles. Those are 2 different materials. So those materials need to be sorted if we're going to recycle them. And then the other piece to remember is that because we subsidize oil and gas so much in this country. It doesn't make any sense for plastic manufacturers, packaging manufacturers to use recycled materials, because recycled materials, we have to collect them, separate them, clean them, and then reuse them. They would much rather take the oil and gas and just straight up make it out of virgin materials. That's worse for the environment, much worse for the environment. That's more expensive. That's more polluting. It's a bad idea in a lot of ways, but it's what we've created for incentives in this country. So we need to understand that if we're going to recycle plastics, you can only do it a few times. It's not like glass and aluminum where you can do it endlessly, and it needs to be sorted and clean if it's actually going to happen. So systems don't work that don't do that. And so what happened is, about 10 years ago, all the waste companies who, as I told you, purchased the recycling companies, started pushing single stream recycling. And they didn't just push single stream recycling and stop the dual stream and the deep sort systems. They also said, you can put whatever the heck you want in your recycling bins. And that's a lie. You never could. So there are articles, Casella and Waste Management came out saying 10 years ago, oh, throw your laundry basket in there. No, throw your Christmas lights in there. It's all made of plastic, no problem. Those materials were never recyclable. And when I say recyclable, I mean there was no market for them to be made into what they were already. There was no great big bin of Christmas lights or laundry baskets that was going to be made into new laundry baskets or Christmas lights. That we never reached that level of sorting or organization. So as a result, what these companies were really selling was, we're going to bundle all these different plastics together, and we're going to bundle all these different papers together, and we're going to send them to China. And in China, there'll be folks who are paid less than they are in the United States who will sort these materials more carefully and be able to get some value out of them. Though we suspect that much of those materials were actually just being burned and buried in China as well. Once China built up their recycling system, they didn't need our crap anymore. And as a result, they stopped accepting it. So they started off by saying, we'll only take your materials if they're well sorted, like really well sorted, like 0.5% of contamination, meaning other materials in there. We couldn't meet any of those standards. So no longer could we send our mixed plastic and our mixed paper to China. So rather than saying that that broke the system, I would say that exposed that the system was broken. So now waste companies are saying, gee, we had this great idea to up how much we were recycling by putting more and more stuff in the bin, whether we had a market or way to sort it out or not. Now what we're going to do is charge cities and towns for that. So we've seen recycling contracts across Massachusetts just shoot up over the last 2 years because of this, because they refuse to say that they were wrong in the system. They refuse to change what they're doing. They want to make as much money as possible. And they truly don't care if materials get recycled. If there's no value for the materials, as long as they're being paid by the contracts from the cities and towns, they'll just throw the stuff in the incinerator or the landfill, which they also own. So there's no real reason for them to do a good job with recycling. And that's what's happened with China and our broken recycling system, which I know people will have questions about. I'm happy to get to. However, you should still sort your recyclables. You should still be resorting your recyclables, because only then will we actually be able to evaluate what's in the system and actually create a system that will work, which I can tell you some more about. But do not give up sorting. I know it sounds like, oh, this stuff's just getting thrown away, so screw it. That is not the way to think about it, because if we can pull these materials out and then look at what's not recyclable in the trash, we can start eliminating those materials in the trash too. So that's a whole nother thing. Next slide, please. So the impact that COVID has had on our waste system in Massachusetts, this was all going on with China regardless. It had nothing to do with COVID. COVID, though, has first of all put the screws to everybody, because of course everybody's budgets are going to be really constrained over these next few years. And also people are home. So our recycling and our waste has shifted to residential from commercial. Probably about 5 to 10%, though we don't have good numbers yet on that. So it'll be interesting to see. And so this exacerbates the problems that we're already suffering through with the system. Next slide, please. So we have a solution to this problem with zero waste. And so next slide. So what is zero waste? When we talk about zero waste, it sounds nice, but what is it? It really means phasing out toxics that harm our communities and environment. And this is something that a lot of folks don't realize. You can't just be recycling or composting or reusing materials, you have to make sure that you're also decreasing toxicity as much as possible. And there are a lot of ways that companies have greenwashed and said that they're pursuing a zero waste methodology when they're not doing that. We need to conserve all resources. We need responsible production, consumption, reuse, and recovery of all products, packaging, and materials. No burning, no high heat, no land or water or air pollution as little as possible. And then that will then lead to no threats to the environment and human health. And as we put these end of life zero waste programs in place, we find that they actually change upstream decisions, which is really important and makes a big difference. I'm going to try and move along more quickly. Next slide, please, because I know people have lots of questions. This is the zero waste hierarchy. Take a good look at this and understand that if you're trying to make decisions in your own life or for policies, this is what you want to look at. Rethinking and redesign should always be first, and then you want to reduce. If you don't use something, there's no footprint. Remember that. So if you don't use it, that's best case scenario. Also, if you reuse something, that's your next best case scenario. So in other words, you want it to be reusable. Single-use plastic, yes, that's terrible, but single-use compostables are only slightly better. If you actually are recycling or composting something, you're still transporting it, you're still using the energy and the materials to recycle and compost it. It's always better to reduce and reuse first. And that's true across the system. You'll find any time you say, oh, but is it really better to use reusables in this system? Almost always that's the answer. Next, please. Zero waste also saves you money. Next slide, please. I said it as a question, so I confused you. Zero waste saves you money. And this is something that, I will send, I'm sure that we can share the slides afterwards so you can take a closer look at this. It saves you money, it saves businesses money, it really saves cities and towns money, and then it also saves the government money. Remember that, for instance, the Mass DEP paid $5 million for a water line to be put in for the homes near the Southbridge landfill. $5 million. That's a lot of money. You could do a lot with $5 million. The end of life problems that landfills and incinerators create are much worse and much more expensive for all of us than the things that we can avoid using zero waste. But there's a lot more direct savings as well. Next slide, please. So we want to get into some of the answers and policies and programs that get us to zero waste. I'm going to very briefly, next slide, please, talk about pay as you throw, and then we can jump into some questions. So pay as you throw is also known as save money, reduce trash, or SMART. And what it really is unit-based pricing. What we're talking about is trying to incentivize using, producing less waste. Usually it's by paying for a bag or paying more for a larger trash receptacle. Next slide, please. So what you'll see is that this really works. In Worcester, they had a 47% waste reduction and a 40% increase in recycling. Needham, 50% waste reduction, 30% increase in recycling. Vernon, Vermont, 56% waste reduction, recycling collection doubled. It saves money. It's a great educator because people start looking at their waste system and saying, oh, wait a minute, where is this stuff going? Is it really recyclable, or should I just not buy it anymore? And then also it positively impacts low-income households, especially if it's done well. Next slide, please. So that piece of it, we could talk all day just even about pay as you throw or unit-based pricing. One of the ways that these things should all work together, that's one of the things about zero waste that I think is interesting and fun, is that every city and town should do things a little bit differently, and there's no one solution that's going to fix everything. We need these pieces to work together. Producer responsibility for packaging is one of the solutions that we have that really works. We've seen it work in Canada, we've seen it work in Europe. And what it means is if you make it, then you have to pay for the end of its life. In other words, you're paying into a fund if you're a producer. You pay more if your material, your packaging is less recyclable, less reusable, or worse for the environment. You pay less if it's reusable, recyclable, or better for the environment. And so in Massachusetts, we have a great bill called HD 1553 that Rep. Day from Stoneham has sponsored. And we helped figure out the best policies for this by looking all over the country. Maine is looking at this. Vermont's thinking about it next session. Connecticut's looking at this. This is a way to build up infrastructure at the city and town level so that they get paid back 100% of the cost of their recycled packaging. And then also so that we start putting in, incentives in place, or eco-modulated fees as they're called, so that they increase and improve what they're doing for packaging. So that instead of having a toothpaste tube in a box, they stop putting the box out there at all, and maybe the tube is now recyclable where it wasn't before. And then that saves the company money, so they change how they do things. Next slide, please. Let's see. And so as I said, this shifts costs away from the cities and towns and taxpayers back to the folks who are actually making decisions and can change what's in the waste. And it also incentivizes more efficient recycling systems. And then, as I already mentioned, the eco-design for products. Next slide, please. There's also a bill called HD 3596, which Rep. Sicolo, and who's from Lexington and Weymouth, and Senator Lewis have sponsored. This bill is trying to take care of the things that are not recyclable, that shouldn't be in your recycling, and that end up in your disposal if things are sorted properly, yet you have no way of getting rid of them because there's no market for them, so you're just going to pay for them in disposal. So this would ban plastic grocery bags, polystyrene, nips, single-use water bottles, black plastic, which because of the way the conveyor belt systems work, it can't be sorted properly, balloon releases, plastic wipes, straws except on request. And then it also puts a fee on utensils and like ketchup and soy packets from takeout, so that way the restaurant will be compensated for them, but also it encourages everyone to not accept them and to say, no, I don't want them if you're not going to use them because you're eating at home. Because those materials are also not recyclable. Next slide, please. And then the last bill is modernizing the bottle bill, which is HD 4039. These numbers, by the way, are interim numbers. These aren't the permanent numbers for the session. There's a 2-year session in Massachusetts. All the bills were filed a couple weeks ago. They get interim numbers and then they get permanent numbers for the session. But these are numbers you can use throughout to look them up. And expanding the universe of containers in the bottle bill is really crucial, because when we started the bottle bill, we didn't have things like bottled water or kombucha. Who the heck knows where that is? So this would expand the containers, similar to the bill that's at the federal level, which hasn't passed, but we have hopes. It would expand the containers to include everything up to 3 liters, except for milk products, medicine, formula, and very, very small local juice companies. Everybody else, if it's a beverage in a bottle or a can, so no pouches or cartons or anything like that, but bottles and cans up to 3 liters, it would be included, including water, nips, liquor, wine, everything. This would take a lot of glass out of the curbside system that we were talking about. So instead of paying, $70 to $125 a ton for this curbside, if you can take the glass out, you've just reduced a lot of money for folks. Then that weight is gone. So we want those liquor and wine bottles out of there. We want the water bottles not to be littering the side of the road. We want the nips not to be littering the side of the road. I'd rather see them banned, as the other bill did. But if that fails, I would love to see them as part of the bottle bill. And it also brings everything up to a dime. Instead of 5 cents, it'd be a dime, which would encourage redemption. Right now, our redemption rate is down to 50%. Which is pathetic. If it goes up to a dime, hopefully it'll get around 90%, which is what we've seen in Oregon and Michigan and other states that are at a dime. The other thing to remember about this is not only would it save cities money, not only would it generate less litter, not only would it increase recycling, these materials would be better sorted, like I was talking about before, the deep sort. Bottle bill is an automatic deep sort system. Wouldn't cost the Commonwealth anything. In fact, the unredeemed fees go to the state. And if we increased the number of containers and increased the fee this much, we'd probably bring in about $80–90 million more into the state each year, just in the general fund. So this is a good idea. Okay, we're just about there, people. So where do we go from here? Next slide, please. Let's move right on to the last 2 slides. Big opportunity. We have a huge opportunity to get organic waste out of the system. The state has proposed regulations to increase how much commercial food producers are supposed to put in disposal. In other words, keep it out of disposal and put it in recycling, composting, and anaerobic digestion. It used to be a ton of weak producers. Now it's going to be down to half a ton of weak producers. We want to see it get to a total prohibition of all food waste, like Hamilton, Massachusetts has done in the trash. Also, any local programs that are created supports this. We need to do this. It's a fourth of the waste is food waste, and that's why it stinks. That's why a lot of the methane problems happen in landfills. Let's get out of the system. It's cheaper to compost it, and it creates a lot of local green jobs. So composting is 100% win across the board. And then next slide, tackling textiles, mattresses, and cardboard is also really smart at the local level. These are very recyclable materials. The textiles and mattresses have been banned, are being banned now by Mass DEP, so they won't be allowed in disposal anymore. Cardboard has been banned for a long time. You should be able to not only save money, but make money on these systems if you can keep it separate from the rest of your garbage. Next slide, please. So what are our takeaways? Last slide. So we have our trash system now has a very negative impact on a lot of really vulnerable communities. You know, those incinerators are in those EJ communities for a reason, unfortunately. And those large landfills are in those communities, and they're having to deal with the stench and the inevitable health impacts of those systems. It's expensive. It's about $100 a ton to dispose of trash that way. We need to do something else to save us all money. Zero waste works. I think you have a better idea. You can look at the Zero Waste International Alliance definition if you ever want to really dig into it. But zero waste means no toxicity. Do a better job with your materials so that you're working upstream as well as downstream to reduce, reuse, recycle, compost, and then redesign all the way through. We can fix our recycling system if we require producers to be responsible for the cost and also do things that work, like deposit return systems. That bottle bill is still our best recycling program. It works, and it doesn't cost us any money because it's a producer responsibility system. We need to redistribute the cost of our waste system. And finally, we need to create change, which means those local programs you're doing, the local bans are fantastic. They really work to push things up to the state level. We need to get state level action done. And the more you call your reps, your senators, the more you talk to your local officials about this, the more you get the word out on this, it makes a huge difference. So all of these pieces, we can get something done at the state level, especially when the state legislators hear how much pain and suffering is going on because of the recycling costs increasing and the disposal costs increasing due to COVID and the situation with not being able to send our junk to China anymore. So there's a lot we can do, and it really makes a huge difference to have people on the ground doing it. So that's the presentation, a little longer than I had hoped, but I think we got through everything. And now ready for questions, Joel. Joel's in charge of questions.
Yeah, thank you very much. We do have a bunch of questions. And to start with the big ones about the landfills and the incinerators, when are they going to fill up in Massachusetts? And when they do, what happens to our garbage at that point?
So, you know how they say there are no bad questions? There are no bad questions. And that's a good question because that's what you hear all the time, but it's not really the right question. And what I mean by that is we are sending our materials already out of state. About 1 million tons a year is going out of state. We burn 3.2 million tons a year around each year in our incinerators here in state. We also, as a result of that, have to landfill about 800,000 tons of toxic ash from the incinerators. And then we have, as I said, another 2.3 or so million tons of waste that has to go somewhere. About 1 million of it goes here in Massachusetts landfills, and then the rest of it goes to whatever is the best price in New Hampshire, Ohio, sometimes as far away as North or South Carolina, Virginia. And what's interesting about that is, so the argument is, oh, we should be handling all our waste here in Massachusetts. This is the landfill company's argument. So you got to let me build some more landfills. Oh yeah, I make a lot of money at those landfills. That's not why I want to do it. I want to help you all by landfilling all this stuff that you're throwing away. So New Hampshire bought that argument, and New Hampshire has a lot of commercial landfills. They landfill an extra 1 million tons of waste from out of state every year. And in fact, they produce about 1.2 million tons of waste themselves in New Hampshire. But they send half of that, like 500,000 tons, out of state to be landfilled. So the idea that we don't have enough capacity, this is a regional system. There's plenty of capacity. That's not the issue. The issue is we got to stop burying this shit. We got to stop producing waste and burying it, because most of what we're burying and burning are compostable, recyclable materials, or materials that we shouldn't be using, like the plastic. So what's us getting enough capacity is a wrong question. There will always be enough capacity. It'll just cost a little bit more, maybe. I hope it does. If we close down all the incinerators in the state, I bet we'd have composting within a month across the whole state. So to me, we do not want to build enough incinerators or landfills, because when you build it, you feed the beast. So instead, don't even worry about that. New Hampshire has more than enough, and so we're filling their landfills. It doesn't really work the way you think it would work to limit people. It just doesn't.
Okay. You had mentioned about the redesign of products and the resisting the buying of all the packaging in different ways. How do we put pressure on the manufacturers and producers to use less and to redesign their products?
So we're seeing manufacturers across the board talk about how they're just so into this idea and they just love it, right? They're like, oh, we want producer responsibility. Like, this is awesome. Like, have you seen that? What's that bottle campaign that Coke and Pepsi are doing, that like 100% recyclable bottle or whatever, take back every bottle. So these companies always will tell you that they don't want to produce waste, and they are doing amazing things like keep America beautiful, keep Massachusetts beautiful. That's Coke and Pepsi, right? We're going to pick up trash we're going to give you a little bit of money to pick up trash at the side of the road. These companies pay millions of dollars not to be responsible. Millions of dollars. When we tried to expand the bottle bill by ballot initiative in 2014, the American Beverage Association, Coke and Pepsi, spent something like $11 million to defeat that ballot question. So what we have to do is not believe their nonsense anymore. We have to smarten up and realize that almost everything that the packaging companies come up with, and this is food packaging, this is beauty products, all that, almost everything they come up with is a smoke and mirrors way to a red herring. So you'll think it's a good idea and not do what's in front of you. So we need to absolutely expand the bottle bill. That will save us all money, reduce litter, save the cities and towns money, result in much more and much better recycling. And it's not going to put Coke and Pepsi out of business. Trust me, they're doing this in Europe and they're fine. So that's the first thing. Then we need to implement producer responsibility systems that are kind of stepping up over time. In other words, I don't want to see a producer responsibility system that gives the keys to the castle to these producers. I don't trust them. Their idea of recycling is burning it. They will very literally, these companies will tell you, we are 100% zero waste. And when you ask them what zero waste means, many of these companies will say, we don't landfill. Well, they burn everything. So you have to understand that you can't trust the definitions, because they're always trying to make all the money and not take care of the problem that they're creating. So producer responsibility for packaging, the bill that Rep. Day 1553, I think it is, filed, that's a bill that would give the money back to cities and towns, leave the power in the cities and towns and DEP's hands. And then as the system evolves, maybe there'll be enough give and take so that we can trust, good definitions and good staff across the system. But right now we don't have that. So those are the two things that are probably the most important thing to do. And then the last thing, you just have to recognize that if there's no market to recycle something, if it's not recyclable in the real world, if there's no place you can take it, it's not recyclable. It might be recyclable in a lab somewhere, but I don't care about that. That's useless to all of us. So we need to be very strong on, any filmy plastic, not recyclable. Any small plastic, less than 2 inches, not recyclable with a conveyor belt system. Only number 1, number 2, and number 5 plastics are recyclable. So anything else you can ban in your town, anything else that you can, stop using in your business or home, that's the direction we got to go in. And we have to be really honest about that and set standards and then hold everybody to those standards.
Okay. On that line, as you said, you could try to put the pressure on the producers. It's a question about, do you know of any community or state or country that's putting pressure on the distributors, the grocery store, for example, to improve their packaging?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think that, for instance, there are lawsuits against Walmart about their packaging. There are also a lot of campaigns internationally pushing certain grocery stores. I think that part of it is going to be a really important next phase. And let me tell you why. We're seeing composting happening across New England. We really are. There are lots of local programs that weren't there 5 years ago, drop-off programs, pickup programs, like commercial pickup programs where you hire someone to come pick up your composting. Cambridge has got its program it's working on. And the hierarchy for food waste is similar to the zero waste hierarchy for all waste. First, you want to reduce, then you want to feed people, then you want to feed animals, and then you want to compost. So if you can stop buying something, that's the best thing. If you can feed people with it, because there's so many food insecure people, that's the next best thing. And then it's feeding animals. We're finding that, Vermont has got a ban on food scraps going into the trash. So we're seeing some really good programs developing there and some ways that farmers are getting this food to feed animals, which is fantastic. However, there's a lot of plastic in it because it's going through deep packaging facilities, and all that filmy plastic, unless you're washing it out, you can't get the filmy plastic out. So we're seeing like 15%, maybe even 20% filmy plastic in these food scraps. So we need to change how the grocery stores handle food and what they expect from it, because a lot of that is, packaged vegetables that have been wrapped in filmy plastic, for instance. So I think that's happening in some places, and we need to keep working on that. And also, I think setting the standards at the state level will help us get there over time, if that makes sense. So I think there's a whole commercial campaign coming, not that I've got it planned yet, but I think there's commercial campaigns coming that really need to happen. The grocery stores, and I think Amazon, obviously, we need reusable containers. We need containers to go back and be reused because this is not working, what we're doing now.
Speaking of filmy plastic, like plastic bags in the newspaper, the bag the newspaper comes with, or bread or whatever, some places.
Saran wrap, anything like that, a lot of that is stuff, it's really not recyclable in any way, shape, or form.
So the stores like Market Basket, they are collecting those things now. Is that greenwashing? Do they just toss it out, or is there something they can do with all those bags?
I've been told that a lot of the plastic bags, when they're collected, get made into plastic decking. So they get downcycled into plastic decking or benches. The problem is that, again, we want this, right? We want circularity. We want to make sure that you're using something, all of it's going to be collected, and then it's going to be either reused or it's going to be recycled. So we don't need to use a virgin material anymore. Plastic bags, we will never achieve that, because if you recycle filmy plastic, you end up with less filmy plastic than you started with. And it's more expensive to collect it than would ever make it reasonable to recycle it. Not only, and that's true, even I think without the subsidies, that's true for filmy plastic. So when someone tells you we have a system, the Flexible Packaging Institute tells you they have a system for their plastic, they're always talking about downcycling, best case scenario. It is much, much better to avoid the use of those materials in the first place, because the way they've set it up, you're always going to need another plastic bag. They're not going to be able to make that plastic bag into another plastic bag. They're going to use virgin materials to make it in a plastic bag. So I don't think that the local stores are necessarily being dishonest, but they're not creating a sustainable circular system in any way, shape, or form. I think a lot of plastic solutions are just that. They're not real solutions. They're unsustainable, nibbling around the edges, and really not decreasing the toxicity that's inevitable from fracking gas, refining the gas, making plastic. And then again, it ends up in the environment. So no, so I would say, all those things they're probably trying, but it's really not worth it. Just avoid the plastic entirely.
Okay. Some of the big ticket items like mattresses, tires, any thoughts about that? Any communities that are dealing with that?
So the DEP, as I think I mentioned, but it was quick, DEP is banning the disposal of mattresses, meaning that they're not allowed to go into incinerators or landfills anymore. Mattresses are 85, 95% recyclable, meaning that you can tear them apart and really use all the components, which is amazing. And they also cause problems at the facilities. You don't want a mattress at your incinerator or your landfill. They're just bulky and a pain in the neck to deal with. So even the waste companies are fine with losing that tonnage. The problem, of course, is creating a system of collection and actually making sure the recycling happens, because about 40% of what's going into our landfills and incinerators from Massachusetts are waste ban items. About 2 million tons shouldn't be going into our landfills or incinerators. That's why when we talk about, do we have enough capacity? We don't have enough inspectors to keep the stuff out. That's our problem, not that we don't have enough facilities. So it's easy to say something's banned. We have to actually make sure it doesn't end up in the landfill or incinerator. I know that Senator Kennedy has a mattress EPR, producer responsibility bill, that would get them collected. And then there are some companies, UTech and others, who create good green jobs recycling those mattresses. So there's hope, and that's a good thing for local government to try and help out with in collecting those mattresses. But we really want to see a state system that makes sure that if someone brings you a mattress, they pick up your old mattress, which a lot of them do, but then also places for people, clean, dry places for people to bring used mattresses to across the state. And then tires are a thornier issue. Tires are made of really toxic, contaminated material. So even just using your tire on the road is meaning that there are a lot of microplastics that are going into the environment. Tires, there's a collection problem in Massachusetts. We really should have a producer responsibility for tire program. But then also tires, we did a bunch of research on this a couple of years ago. There are ways to break tires down into their parts, the different chemicals they're made of, and then make new rubber out of them, make new tires out of them. But it's not an easy process. It's not necessarily the cleanest process. It's much cleaner than burning the tires, which is what's happening now largely, or burying them. But they're a problem because they're so toxic. So really we need to start making our tires out of something that's not as toxic, which is a big lift. It's difficult. The best thing though is to please keep them out of the rivers, which was what we're seeing. They're going into rivers and being dumped illegally. So there should be an EPR program to at least help with that.
Picking up on that, as I think Weston's been looking at a pay-as-you-throw program. One comment seen as, well, then will people just dump their trash in the alley? And, if there's a fee for big ticket items like tires and refrigerators, will people just dump them? Is that anything you've noticed?
So, sometimes there will be increases in dumping something like a tire or a couch when you put a fee on it. I would say generally, though, that illegal dumping of trash doesn't usually work out that well for people. First of all, a lot of times someone sees them do it or sees them drive to do it and rats them out. Just says what their license plate is. It's not like you can carry a tire around. Also, we find that, bags of trash, for instance, they usually have identifying information in them. So it's not really, it's not something that, let's put it this way. There may be a little bit of illegal dumping whenever you start a new system, but on the whole, most people want to do the right thing, and most people will report when they see someone doing the wrong thing. And we also find that the more education there is around these issues, the better people do. And ironically, the more programs you have that are rolled out over time and done in an intelligent way, the more you'll find that enforcement of one reinforces enforcement of another. In other words, pay as you throw makes people start thinking about what they're buying more so that they do a better job with their recycling. Composting, once you've taken the yucky food scraps out of the waste, a lot of times people are more willing to deal with their recycling and think about it and then look at what's left in their trash. So we find that mostly that if you've got good programs, people will do the right thing. It's like the seatbelt law. You know, once you make it a law, everybody pretty much sits down and does it the right way. They may object to it at first, but you know, it's not that difficult to ticket for these things and stuff. So works out pretty well. We don't see a rash of, you know, illegal dumping because someone started pay as you throw. It'd be a little bit, but that's not the problem. The problem is usually political opposition because people didn't know they were paying for their trash, and then suddenly you're making them pay for their trash in person instead of it just being buried in their tax bill, which it may have been for decades. Suddenly they're responsible for, you know, actually paying for it, and they all of a sudden, you know, revolt for that reason, not understanding that they always paid for it, but it just wasn't separated out.
You said in Worcester, when they had a pay-as-you-throw program, the amount of trash went down by 40%. Do you have any sense of why? What was it? Was it people started to recycle more? They started to compost more? What was it?
It wasn't the composting. It was recycling more, and also people buy different stuff. It's not, if you look back through the slides, Joel, you'll see that there is an increase in recycling usually when pay-as-you-throw starts, but it's not a one-to-one increase. So people will say, well, I'm not going to buy these styrofoam cups because they're not recyclable. We're not going to use those anymore. And so they might buy some reusable cups or find some other alternative, but they do change their habits as well. And I would say with pay as you throw, the two things to be aware of to make a system that really works and works well. Number one, you want to find the correct, three things they work on. Number one, you want to find the correct price point. You want the bag, if you're, you know, selling an orange bag, like some towns do, for instance, or charging more for a larger trash receptacle than a smaller one, you want to charge the correct amount so that you're actually incentivizing good behavior in your community. So you might have to fiddle with that number a little bit, or, you know, do some research as to what other folks have done. But pay as you throw, there's a study that UNH did that showed that pay as you throw worked really well in New Hampshire cities and towns that had it as compared to towns that didn't have it in New Hampshire. So we know this works. So number one, find your price point and make sure that you pick the right price point. Number two, make sure that you aren't punishing low-income people. You know, this is not something that you want to create a problem for somebody. So there are ways to, for instance, if someone's already receiving benefits because they're struggling, then you could automatically have them also included in a program where they get a certain number of bags for free a year, for instance, or other ways of handling it. So you want to make sure that you're not creating an onerous situation for people who are struggling in your community. And then lastly, I would say you want to revisit that pay-as-you-throw program. And what I mean by that is you want to charge a little bit more for the bags. You want to charge a little bit more or require that someone reduces their trash receptacle, however you're doing it over time, because this shouldn't be a flat line. It's not that you have a pay-as-you-throw system or a smart system or whatever you want to call it, and realize that decrease and then be done. You should be able to ramp up over time, especially if you couple that pay-as-you-throw system with composting systems, with bans on non-recyclable plastics and other materials, and of course support the bills I'm working at the state level on, so that way you can get the bottles and cans, for instance, entirely out of the recycling system, and, you know, make people start thinking about those things. So you want to make sure that you're realizing you're doing a little better every year on pay as you throw. You don't want to just be satisfied that after a couple of years you had these great results. You want to keep working on it.
Okay. Questions about the bottle bills.
Mm-hmm.
Bill, how do we get it passed? And a different question, but what was the number of the bill, the cradle to grave that you mentioned?
Oh, I love Stephanie because she put this in the thing for me. So the single-use omnibus bill, is that what you mean? There are three that I mentioned. There's the the producer responsibility for packaging, which is HD 1553. There's the omnibus single use bill, which is 9 bans and then a fee on utensils and soy packets and stuff to help out our restaurants. And that's 3596, HD 3596. And then the bottle bill is HD 4039. And so as far as getting any of these bills passed, passing a bill is always difficult. There's this idea that if your legislator files a bill, then it's done, all set, thanks a lot. That is not the case. We really need cities and towns on these bills because cities and towns are being hammered by recycling costs. I've been gathering up contracts from different cities and towns to see those increases, and also talking to local officials all over the state. That makes a huge difference. We have a zero waste caucus now led by Senator Lewis and Rep. Sokola. Rep. Sokola has been amazing. She's trying to get as much support as possible behind these bills, as well as other good bills like the mattress EPR bill and other things that are really important. But we really need people to call their legislators. If you're interested in doing a Zoom call with your legislator and you want to say, hey, I know this senator or I know this rep, hey, Kirstie, you want to have a call them? That helps. Having constituents on the phone makes a big difference. We're going to put together some resolutions for cities and towns to pass. I think that will be helpful. It's really showing up at the hearings, which may be Zoom hearings this year, writing letters to the editor, writing a letter or an quick email to your legislators. All of those pieces make a huge difference. Having your local officials write a letter to the legislators, all of those pieces are important. And of course, the way the system works, we have to get them through committee first. Then we have to pass them on both the House and the Senate, and then pass a resolved version. So there'll be multiple times when your voice is being heard can make a huge difference. So definitely follow along with what I'm up to, but also if you're not into Twitter, for instance, or Facebook or whatever, feel free to email me and we can put you on our update list so you know when to show up for hearings. All of those pieces, all of those communications make a big difference. I've been told by representatives that when they get 8 phone calls, they know something's important to their constituents. That's not very many. So we really need people power to pass those bills.
Okay. We should start to wrap it up, but there's a couple of questions that have come in about composting. And just to begin with, you had said about 30% is food waste. So that does not include yard waste, presumably like leaves and grass.
I think if you go to 30, you would be including yard waste usually. It's probably more like 20. And again, the number varies, it just depends, but it's something like 22 to 30%. Yeah. And I think if you go to 30, that it would be yard waste too.
So there's various different solutions one can have. A compost pile in the backyard, which may not be available if you live in an apartment.
Yeah.
Put it in with the rest of the trash, which is what a lot of people do, and it just goes into the dumpster. Some communities are exploring with companies like Black Earth, which I'm sure you've heard of. Yeah. So the general question about is that efficient? Presumably trucks come to take your compost and those trucks use fossil fuels to take it someplace. Has anybody done the economics on all this?
Yeah. As far as the footprint and all this stuff. So let me back up a little bit because I'm happy to talk about composting all night. I'm one of those people. So you can have a compost pile in your backyard. I throw it over the stone wall. I live on a big property. I'm in the center of a state. There's plenty of room. I can do that. You don't have to be fancy. You don't have to be making it into soil. You don't have to worry about that. If you've got room, you can do that. If you don't have room, you can also, of course, have a composting container and be more scientific about it. And that's a better, and you can also just put your vegetative matter in it. So if you've got a smaller yard and you're worried about pests, don't put meat, fish, eggs, that kind of stuff in your composter. And that's pretty pest-free. It's not going to be too much of a problem for you. If you're constrained in that way, but you still do eat meat and you want to get those things out of your system too, then what you can do is use what's called a green cone. It's about $200. It's an upside down cone, so the pointy top above ground, and then underground, it's a little laundry basket buried in the ground. And the heat from the way the green cone is constructed breaks down the bones and meat and fish or whatever the heck else you're putting in there. So you can use that if you don't have room even for a regular composter, or if you want to make sure that you deal with your putrescibles, as I call it, dairy and meat and fish and that kind of stuff. So green cones, and I think they're on back order, but that's really worthwhile. And supposedly they handle the food waste for a family of about 5. So you can share them with the next apartment over or whatever you want to do. They just need to be in the sun for at least a few hours every day. So that they have to be buried somewhere where there's sun. When it comes to hauling materials, there's a big concern, and this is true across the waste system. I hear this about, is it better to haul the compost, or is it better to just throw it in the landfill because there's always already a truck coming? Is it better to bring the bottles and cans back and forth for refilling them? The material, the energy and environmental impact to create something new is always much, much larger, whether you're looking at the energy, the water usage, the labor, and the other raw materials. It's much more than would be used by transportation. So you should, of course, try and minimize your transportation, but you are better off reducing the methane emissions from a landfill and composting, and moving those materials in that way than just throwing it in the trash. Also remember, your food in your trash is being picked up by a trash truck, and the heaviest component is food. If you don't have any food in the trash, that garbage truck can carry a lot more. That's 6 or 7 tons that a garbage truck can carry. That's really food. So if you can keep the food out, you're saving the oil and gas there anyway. So remember that when you're looking at this, you really shouldn't worry about the transportation piece of it. You're already transporting this stuff all over the place. That's true. I read an analysis lately. That's even true if you're talking about having an aluminum container of conditioner sent to you versus using a plastic bottle of conditioner from the store. Because a truck full of packages that includes your package, the transportation cost of that, the environmental cost, is not as much so as you driving to a store anyway and getting relatively few goods coming back with you. So not to say don't worry about transportation, but when it comes to waste, don't worry about transportation. Worry about plastic and worry about single use. And then anytime you can compost, that's a huge, huge push. And also remember, reduce first. So if you can do a better job with your grocery list so that you're not throwing out as much food, there's a tremendous energy input and water input of producing food. If in fact, our food waste problem is, I think, number 2 or number 3 on the drawdown list when you're looking at climate change. So first, reduce. This is true for food as well as for everything else. First, reduce. Don't worry about driving it around. That's not going to be your problem. Your problem is that you threw out a head of lettuce there was a lot of water and energy that it took to make that lettuce, and you threw it out without eating it. That's where our problems are.
Okay. Just 2 more questions. We had a number of questions about specific products like those containers for milk or juice, the packages for, kids use for sipping. They have, I think they have multiple materials in there. At the same time, wondering about biodegradable beverage containers and those biodegradable bags, those green bags that you can buy.
Yeah.
Some specific questions about a few products like that.
So again, you want to use your zero waste hierarchy to evaluate those things. And again, the solutions and the choices you make as an individual, they add up, and you should try and do the best you can. But if you told me that you were going to do a terrible job in your household, yet you were going to help me make sure that the bottle bill got passed, for instance, if you were able to work 40 hours a week on the bottle bill getting passed, or 2 hours a week, that instead of doing research on individual projects, you were working on the bottle bill, that's probably got more value. So remember that you're producing very little trash and using very few things. So that's not to say that you shouldn't try and make better choices. You really should. And I do that myself. But please don't torture yourself, because really the problem here is that there's not a good system for refill and reuse for most of these products, right? So, you know, if like, for instance, my husband uses the daily contacts and he throws out contacts every single day, and there's a little package and it drives me crazy. But his month worth of contacts is probably not as much as one big laundry, bottle of plastic laundry bottle, right? So you gotta kind of pick your spots and pick your battles and do the best you can. Like, that's the first thing. Um, that being said, try and get off paper napkins, stop using paper towels, never use plastic wrap, you know, buy some glass containers with like a wood or metal top. Try and avoid plastic anytime you can. There's some strips to use for laundry now that I've just ordered some. I'll tell you how they are. Like, all those things, you do the best you can. When it comes to compostable or biodegradable products, most of the time that's baloney. Um, First of all, do you have a composting system that you're using? Because backyard composting won't cut it for that stuff. You need an industrial composting system, which is not anaerobic digestion. It's an industrial windrow, you know, aerobic composting system. A big pile with the right mix in it, right mix of browns and greens, will get to about 120 degrees inside the pile, and those biodegradable materials will then break down in them. Unless you have that, that won't happen. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I am leery of those kinds of products in general, not only because we don't have widespread enough composting, so that they're kind of a false solution. They just end up getting in the trash. And they also oftentimes just muck up the recycling, because people put them in the recycling and they're contamination for the materials that are actually recyclable. So I am leery of them for that reason. But also, I worry that they're not actually biodegradable or compostable solutions. And then finally, we really don't want to be replacing our single-use plastics with single-use paper or other single-use compostables. If you had used something once and it's made of paper, you got to cut down some trees, right, to make it. And you got to use a lot of water, and they're probably bleaching it. And there's probably, you know, PFAS or something else to keep the grease from moving through it. Single use as a whole is crappy. You really want to not use single use whenever you can. There's an organization called Upstream that's done a lot of research on how we really want to move from single use plastics and single use other materials to reusables. That's really the way to go. So, not to say that it's better to not use a toxic plastic container, because you shouldn't eat, you know, hot food from a toxic plastic container, for instance. That's not good for you. And at least you didn't make the plastic to not use it, so that's good. But if you're using a single use anything, you're still not doing the best that you could be doing. We really want to be using reusables. So again, don't drive yourself too crazy, because we don't have systems for reusables right now. And so that's the goal, and where we want to get to with the bottle bill, for instance. I want those all to be refilled bottles, not just recycled bottles. And then that's where we need to get with our with all of our food distribution system. We need to be reusing and refilling these materials. Washing something and transporting back and forth uses much less energy than creating single-use goods.
Okay. And finally, last question, which I just think is a very interesting one.
You were totally picking the questions you like, Joel. I hope everybody knows.
Exactly. Thanks. It's great power here. Is what can we do to invest in zero waste education in the schools to get the next generation thinking about waste?
Well, I love good education no matter what you're talking about, right? Like, I think it's important. But I also think that a lot of times a study or education is used as a cop-out too. So I think that everything we do should include an education component. But if you think that you're going to educate our way out of this without putting laws in place that say shall, you're just not. We've got 10 years, people. We got to get this done over the next 10 years. And when I say we've got 10 years, I'm talking about climate, but all of this leads to climate. The food piece, the plastic piece, we literally cannot combat climate change without overhauling our relationship with single-use materials and food waste. That if we don't do those two things, we have to shut down all our incinerators. We have to shut down our landfills so that we're only landfilling a teeny amount that can't possibly be composted or recycled or reused in any way. We have to do those things. So education is important, but I think we all have to really take big strides and get things done at state and local government. The bolder you are, I mean, Hamilton banning food scraps has made national news. Those 12 towns on the Cape banning plastic single-serve water bottles has made national news. Those are the kinds of actions that are happening locally that reverberate throughout the whole region and throughout the country. And we can get stuff like that done at the House and Senate this year. We have a really great environmental committee this year. They're fantastic. They get these issues, but we need everyone to make those phone calls and call your legislator tomorrow and say, I saw Kirstie, you may have met with her already. I've met with about 30 of them so far this year. You may have met with her already. I'm really for what she's doing. Like, let's get it done. Like so the education is important. It's always should be included, but it's just a piece of this. It really is. A lot of these kids get it already too. They're ahead of the curve in a lot of ways.
Well, that was an excellent wrap up right at the end to put it all together, that it's what we need to do as individuals in our community, in this state, take showing up a meeting, as you said, writing letters, speaking to our neighbors, calling our representatives, getting busy.
Yeah, it makes a big difference. It really does. Yeah, even if you're a Facebook person or a Twitter person or whatever, whatever works for you, just talking to everybody about it. And we have to expect change. We can't be soft on this. We really can't. And it'll save us a lot of money and create a lot of jobs. So there's no reason not to do it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing your time and your expertise with us. This whole session was recorded, so I'm not sure when it will go up, but we can send a notice to people. It's available. I know you have, Kirstie, a blog. So if we did not get a chance to ask all the questions, but maybe some of them are answered in your various articles you have at CLF. Mm-hmm. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And again, email me, kpecci@clf.org, or follow me on Twitter @KirstiePecci, and be in touch. I really thank you so much for having me. This was really fun. And I hope that I answered a lot of questions, and we can always follow up on other pieces of it if people have more questions.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
So long, everybody.